We are thrilled to have with us somebody whom I think is one of the best presenters I have ever met. When I was at CMU and Rob was there as well, there was the expression, a Rob talk. This was not a normal PowerPoint presentation, this was a PowerPoint presentation that is as good as the ones that Rob gives. And I'm sure you were all going to agree with me once you see his presentation today that, you know, the phrase Rob talk is worthwhile. Rob is currently the computer science department head at the University of Illinois. He got his degree in Michigan. He then went to CMU for 25 years, where he started Neolinear, a company that went public, didn't go public, got sold to Reagan's, developing linear analog synthesis software. And then more recently, he's working on a new startup that's working, I don't know what the name is, Rob, working on Bochi, which is working on doing accelerators for speech recognition, a very exciting area. Without further ado, Rob, enthrall us.
Thank you. So thank you, Sonny. Thank you to IEEE. Thank you, CEDA. No pressure. Thanks a lot. I'm going to talk a little bit about the teaching side of the universe. I know that ICCAD is traditionally a research-oriented conference. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the teaching side of the EDA universe. And in particular, I'm going to talk about my experience doing the first massive open online courses in the EDA universe. So let's talk a little bit about MOOCs, massive open online courses. For those of you who are not maybe so familiar, right? We start with basically internet scale video capabilities, right? The same capabilities that let one do something like Netflix in the in the U.S. The technology base that lets it be possible for us with a sufficient amount of bandwidth to watch a video any place on the planet with an appropriate appliance. We add to that the cloud, and what the cloud does for this particular educational opportunity is that the cloud is where the homework assignments are living. The cloud is where homework assignments and software projects and things are graded, because when you have several thousand, several tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people taking one of these courses, humans are no longer capable of scaling to grade these things. It has to all be done with software. You add to this an extremely interesting business model right now, which is that these things are free. Right, so they are offered free to anyone who wants to watch them and participate in them. Yes, there are monetization strategies that are evolving. I'm happy to talk about those offline, but for today, they're free. If anybody wants to take one of these courses, they just click and they're in and they can participate. You put all of these things together, you get massive, open, online courses. Anybody on the planet with an appropriate appliance who can watch the videos and do the homeworks is capable of participating in this course. It's a very big idea, right? You know, showed up a couple of years ago, basically in 2011. It's not without controversy. So, you know, depending on what public sources of news you read, you read things like, will massive open online courses, revolutionize higher education? There's lots of discussions as to whether this is the end of brick and mortar universities. We will no longer recruit very smart students to universities that have a physical presence, a building, a campus. We will all be replaced with heartless metal robots. Right? Not so much. Right? I actually think there's still value add for humans in these things, but more opinion pages from the from the New York Times. Revolution hits the universities. There's been lots of talk about revolution. So this particular keynote is my experience doing MOOCs. So from March to May 2013, I did the first MOOC on the planet. Right, and it was delivered on the platform from Coursera.org. There is a competing ecosystem of platform providers for these massive open online courses. The University of Illinois, which is where I work, is partnered with Coursera. And then I did it again, right? From March to May 2014, I did the second EDA MOOC. And I'm about to do it again. From February to April 2015, I will offer this thing yet again. And basically, the substance of this talk is my experience in building these things and delivering them. So the basically the three-part outline of today's lunch talk is, for my experience with the first EDA MOOCs, what are they? Right, just like, what's in it? How did we construct these things? How did we deliver these things? How did we interact with our students? And then maybe a question that you weren't actually anticipating me talking about: why did I do this? Right? Because it's not like I don't have a day job. Right? And this was a remarkable amount of effort to do this thing, and to actually, I think, to do it rather well. So let's just start talking about the mechanics of these things. So let's talk a little bit about the context first. I called this course VLSI CAD Logic to Layout. Right? I taught this course for 25 years. I spent 25 years on the faculty at Carnegie Mellon. I taught this course for about 20 years in various forms. I think I taught it at least 15 times to something a little bit less than 1,000 face-to-face students. And it was always called VLSI CAD Logic to Layout. Now, there's a bunch of reasons for that. I fully and freely admit that I came of age in the VLSI era. I was there at the beginning when in 1980 Mead and Conway published the famous book, and it became possible for the very first time for a graduate student to do chips. Right? That was a wonderful transformative moment. Way back in time, Thomas Edison was still alive. Dinosaurs walked the earth. I know all of you, think this is way. Yeah, WW2 was just ending, right? Very exciting time to be working on these technologies. But I was there when this stuff happened. I did, in fact, do a graduate student chip as the result of taking a Mead and Conway class. There it is, right? But why didn't I call it EDA? And the reason I didn't call it EDA is that if your goal is to recruit fresh talent into the discipline that you know and you love, you can't actually use a phrase that is only known to people who are already in the discipline. And as much as it pains me to say this, only people who do EDA for a living know what EDA means. Okay? Sorry, right? But VLSI actually still has a lot of currency in the universe, even if it's not exactly the name that we use for the chips that we design. And it has currency among students. There are still VLSI courses at most great universities. And CAD, despite the fact that it's highly overloaded, and our friends in mechanical, and our friends in other domains, architectural do CAD, people actually still understand this stuff. Nevertheless, inside the class when I was actually doing this stuff, I told people that it's actually honestly called EDA. It was kind of like my first welcome to the club as an insider. Please know we should actually be calling this stuff EDA. But the MOOC is called VLSI CAD Logic to Layout. What does my regular class teach? If you were sitting there when I was teaching this stuff face-to-face to people, what I was doing is I was doing a classical ASIC flow. So we did some layout, we did some logic synthesis, we did some logic verification, which means we did a little bit of formal verification, binary decision diagrams, satisfiability, that sort of thing. We did synthesis, we did verification for both logic and for layout, right? And we did timing. And so we did timing both on the logical side of the universe, and we did timing on the electrical side of the universe. And so it's a somewhat narrow view of what is a gigantic intellectual discipline. And so there's lots of stuff that never actually made it here, right? We did not do any behavioral stuff. We did not do any simulation stuff. We did not do any test stuff. We did not do any co-design stuff. And it is not to say that these are not incredibly important topics. But when you're trying to put the very first course of its kind together, you've got to scope this down to something that you can deliver credibly, completely, coherently in a reasonable amount of time. So this is what we focused on. My physical on-campus class has a lot of collateral. I mean, I'm teaching this for almost 20 years. I've got lots of PowerPoint slides. I've got lots of homework problems. Right? And if you actually look at my physical class, and this is what I actually started with, it's about 15 weeks long because it's a semester in length. I counted, actually, the last time I taught it. It's 948 PowerPoint slides. It's exactly how long it was. Think of this as basically 20 separate slide decks, 20 lectures, delivered as roughly 3 hours a week over 14 weeks. So think of this as basically 52 hours of Rob. Right? That's what VLSI CAD Logic to Layout is. Right? And I've actually just shown you a sort of a screen snap of what the folder with all of the PDFs of all of my lectures looks like on the right-hand side of the screen. But to step back and think about from the MOOC point of view, there's lots of things that are no longer operative constraints. The MOOC does not have to start when the semester starts. Right? There's no physicality to it. The MOOC does not have to end when the semester ends. It does not have to be 15 weeks long in a semester school. It does not have to be 10 weeks long, right, in a quarter school. It can start whenever I want it to start. It can end whenever I want it to end. It can be of any length that makes sense for the delivery of a coherent view of the discipline. So it's entirely up to me what set of material that I get to that I choose to put in it. So what I actually did, which sounds crazy but worked fabulously, was that I spent a couple of very interesting days walking through every single lecture slide, right, in one of the recent editions of the in-person on-campus version of this class, and building what was essentially a concept map. And so I simply walked through every single lecture, and I said, okay, this is a new idea, this is a new concept. How long is this? And the answer was, this is 22 slides long. I'm like, okay, and I made a spreadsheet. And I said, okay, and then here's this next topic, and it's, oh, this is 40 slides long. Yeah, this is not really a topic. This is two topics. One of them is 18 slides long, and one of them is 22 slides long. And I sort of iterated on that. It was actually a very interesting experience for me to sort of disaggregate my course into its component intellectual content. And the reason I made this particular map, and I recognize you can't see anything, right, on this, and so I'll zoom in on this next slide a little bit. The reason I built this is that I need to figure out how much material I want to deliver. I need to figure out how many hours a week I'm going to spend lecturing this material, and I need to figure out what subset of the concepts I'm going to do. Right? And so what I'm showing you here is what the sort of the concept maps for computational Boolean algebra in the box on the top and binary decision diagrams in the box on the bottom, what those things looked like. And the reason I counted PowerPoint slides is that's a good surrogate for time, right? Because what's going to happen is this material is going to turn into video. Right? This material is going to turn into video of me lecturing these topics. And if I'm planning to do 3 or so hours a week, I actually have to figure out how much material I'm going to cover. So I spent a lot of time working on that, and this is what I ended up with. My 20 lectures and 48 PowerPoint slides of my physical in-person class, right, turned into 69 short video lectures, average length 15 minutes per lecture, 615 total PowerPoint slides, 17 total lecture hours of video over a shortened version of this course, a 10-week version of this course. It's roughly 60% of my on-campus course, but interestingly enough, it's delivered in approximately 1/3 of the face time of the time. And that's a completely consistent experience with people who build MOOCs. They are a very efficient means of lecturing material. And the reason is that you don't have to wait for your class to settle down. Right? You don't lose the sort of the first 10 minutes of the class if San Francisco has a particularly bad Sunday in football, right? People sort of, that's what I hear, of talking about things. If some lecture point is not going over very well, you don't actually have to stop and go through and do it again because people are basically consuming this stuff on a DVR. If they don't understand it, they can stop it and rewind it and just run it again. This is what my course actually became when it became a MOOC, right? So it became 8 weeks of instruction delivered in a 10-week form because after you deliver the last weeks of instruction, you have to give people a couple weeks to do homework assignments and finish things up. Computational Boolean algebra, binary decision diagrams and satisfiability for verification, 2 weeks of logic synthesis, basically 2-level and multi-level, placement, technology mapping, routing and timing, both static timing, logical timing, and electrical timing because wires have delay. And if you look at that, you will see that the lectures, and the horizontal axis is time. How many minutes is the lecture? Those things all look pretty short. There's a few bars that are long, right, because I did some detailed example and I chose not to break it up. Perhaps I should have, but most of those bars are really short. And one of the things that people usually ask when they see this slide is, why are the lectures all so short? Right? And there's 2 reasons. One is focus. Right? There's a lot of pedagogy. There's a lot of studies of people who study how students consume and absorb information that suggests small doses of concentrated material is much better. Sort of, a 2-hour video is a heck of a lot of information to consume. A 12-minute video focusing on exactly one topic, much more uptake, much more ability to remember. So that's the pedagogical reason. There's a technological reason that you don't suspect until you start sort of working heavily in the MOOC universe. Bandwidth. In a very significant fraction of the planetary surface, you cannot download 2 hours of video, right? It will never get there. You don't have that much bandwidth to just sort of go get that one video. It will never make it. The only thing you can do is chop things up into little chunks, and then people will literally download that 15 minutes of video overnight, right? And it might take all night, right? And they will consume that 15-minute chunk the next day, right? So you have to think very carefully when you're trying to deliver content at a planetary scale what the local considerations are about the technical infrastructure. So what's in a video lecture? Well, it starts with a title that says this is what we're working on, and then it starts with some talking Rob. All right, so let's see if this actually works. So, we're just going to play a couple of minutes of this. So here in lecture 6.4, we're going to continue our exploration of multi-level logic. What we know is that the algebraic model simplifies our Boolean equations and makes it possible for us to do algebraic division, by which we can divide one Boolean equation by another so that we can do some factoring. But one of the questions that we don't have an answer for yet is, where should we go look to try to find the interesting factors of a complicated set of Boolean equations? And it turns out that the algebraic model offers a beautiful, insightful, and simple answer. The algebraic model actually has a deep structure. There are some interesting foundational parts of Boolean equations represented in the algebraic model, and those foundational parts are called kernels and co-kernels. And it turns out that kernels and co-kernels are where all the action is in a multi-level Boolean logic network. So in this lecture, we're going to explore the basic structure of and definitions of kernels and co-kernels in multi-level logic. So where do we look for good divisors in a big, complicated network? And surprisingly, the algebraic model has a beautiful answer. It's one of the more reasons. So that's the intro, the sort of the warm-up, and then what the rest of the lecture looks like is PowerPoint slides with me writing on them live with live voiceover narration. And it turns out there's lots of modalities for how people choose to put their material together. There are people who really want to be standing in front of a whiteboard or a blackboard and have you sort of, film their hand as it writes equations. There are people that like to write on a clean piece of paper with a camera over the top of it, and watch while you write. There's actually quite a lot of study that suggests that having two camera solution, one on the material, the technical material, and one on your face, right, that shows sort of what you're thinking and what your emotions are when you deliver these things is actually helpful. There's lots of ways of doing it. This is just the way I chose to do it. This was convenient for me, and I think this actually worked pretty well. So an intro, and then a substrate of lecture slides with a lot of the action taking place by me live writing on it, so you could watch math and things happening in real time. Okay, so that's what my 69 lectures, 20-ish hours of kind of content. What did the students in the class actually do to sort of convince us that they were following along? We had homework assignments, and so in this particular course we had 3 or so hours a week of lecture, and we had 8 weekly homework assignments. And in the cloud universe, the way you can do homework assignments, or at least the way we did homework assignments, you can do multiple choice, you can do true false, you can type a number in a box. And one of the things I will note, is perhaps not obvious, this particular MOOC is what's called semi-synchronous. And in a semi-synchronous MOOC, the class has a start and the class has an end. And you can consume the videos anytime you want. They're out there. You can watch them whenever you want. But homework 5 is due on Sunday, right? And there's a sense that this sort of pulls people forward in the MOOCs to sort of have a shared cohort of students and a shared deadline. And they use the cloud to basically go and put their assignments in. So these homeworks were things that actually had hard deadlines, and you would see a gigantic spike of activity right, on the site right before the homeworks were due. So, what's different about these sorts of homework assignments from the in-class versions? Well, on the math side of the universe, you can't do a derivation, right? Or at least you can't do a derivation that you can, grade very well with multiple choice. You have to actually randomize things because you have to provide an oversupply of problems. If everybody sees exactly the same assignment, you're perhaps going to see some cheating problems. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later. Everybody gets a slightly uniqueified version of a homework assignment. That requires actually a substantial amount of work to make that happen. And the big thing you learn is that it's possible to do very complicated questions with very complicated answers if you take a big problem, which in person you would simply put the big problem, here's problem 5, and you'd say solve this, and then it would come back as 20 pages of handwriting, and you'd hand it to your TA and say go. Right, make it happen. You have to take that stuff and put it into some smaller pieces that each have appropriate multiple choice or fill in the blank kinds of answers, and then you can actually get a pretty good sense of whether people are following along or not. This is just a concrete picture. That's actually the answer to one of the homework problems, which is pretty complicated looking. That's a multi-level factoring, and that's like kernels and co-kernels in a multi-level factoring problem. I'm aware of the fact that there's a lot of criticism that MOOCs basically dumb down the learning experience. And you're certainly not going to get an argument for me that if you're sitting 5 feet in front of me taking my class live, it's a richer experience and a more valuable experience. But conversely, I don't think it's a bad experience or an unworthwhile experience getting a slightly different version, a slightly reduced version of this material in this online form factor, because I can actually do this at planetary scale. Right? So most of the burden then comes back to the person who's leading this effort, which in this case is me and my team of extremely brilliant teaching assistants. It comes back to designing smart problems that actually have interesting answers that provoke people to think about what you're asking. Right? And just to add another sort of point on the randomization stuff, you actually have to have an oversupply of problems and an oversupply of answers to those problems. And what actually happens is that in the Coursera platform on which we're operating, the homework assignment is essentially created and bound to the student at delivery time. And the reason you do that is that it keeps concerns about cheating and such down. But the other reason you do that is in this sort of modern universe, as soon as students actually hit submit, the culture is that they actually want to see the solution. Right? They want to know, OK, I only got 70%. What did I do wrong? Right? And they get very upset if you say, I'm going to give you that, but I'm going to give you this in a couple of weeks. Right? So you actually have to uniquely bind a homework assignment to essentially every person in your class so that when they get the homework assignment and they see the solution, it doesn't give them an immediate ability to tell their friends what the right answer is to other problems. This is doable. This works pretty well. This is a lot of work to make these things up. So what else did we do in my MOOC? The other thing we did is we did software. I think this is a fact. You can feel free to disagree with me. I don't think you can teach a serious EDA class without experimenting with some existing design tools and without building some new EDA tools, either pieces of tools or whatever. But this creates some really significant problems. How do you do this at scale? How do you do this if you have 10,000 students in your class? It is not the case that the vendors are going to offer me free licenses. Right, I didn't actually ask, to be honest. It's not the case that the vendors are going to offer me 10,000 copies, right, of Design Compiler, right, to go do this. It's not the case that the platforms these things are running on are going to be able to support that many concurrent users of these things. And you get into some interesting problems of export control and international and intellectual property, and all kinds of interesting legal things come to the fore when you try to do this sort of thing. So what are the potential solutions? What we ended up doing was we used open source software, and we built everything else ourselves, which meant we controlled it and we could put it out there without any legal entanglements. So just by way of background, the Coursera course that I did physically lives on top of Amazon Web Services, right? So it's out there in the Amazon cloud. So we actually put a bunch of open source tools out in the cloud and built portals, web portals, that made it possible for students anywhere on the planet who had access to a reasonably modern browser to sort of go do this stuff. And so we put Espresso, right, out in the cloud. We put SIS. We put a lot of tools from the old glory days of the rise of EDA in the 80s and the 1990s that were, completely public, did not have complicated intellectual property or license entanglement kinds of issues. Where appropriate, we asked the people who built these software. So KBDD is a formal verification tool Randy Bryant built at Carnegie Mellon a long time ago. We put that stuff out in the cloud, and we built portals that made it possible for anybody with a browser to go run those things. And the other thing we did, and I'm going to talk about this a little more, is that we built very sophisticated auto-graders, basically hardcore weapons-grade regression suites for all of the software that we were going to ask our students to actually build so that we could grade their projects also 100% automatically out in the cloud. So we had to do a lot of software, basically porting and a lot of software development in order to make this course actually work. So just as one concrete example, KBDD is a formal verification tool from a long time ago. A student to exercise, to play with that tool, does a text file, which is a script that the tool can consume and do some interesting analysis. And there's basically a web page that they go and they take their text file and they upload it, goes to the Amazon cloud, goes to KBDD, KBDD runs it, generates a text file as output, and it goes back on a private web page which is viewable by the student and the student alone. Right? And so we built a set of portals for each tool and for each software project that we wanted to do that made it possible for students who, in many cases, would never have been able to have access to these tools, right? In many cases, did not have platforms that were at a level of sophistication to do a great job of running these tools, right? To have a reasonable way of interacting with these things and actually do homework assignments and projects. Right? Now, we also did 4 software projects. All right, so we actually had them build basically a Boolean calculator where we had them do data structures for Boolean equations, and we had them do and, or, not, XOR, all of those things. We had them do it in a very old data structure, unate recursive paradigm cube list kinds of things. It turns out to be easy to teach. It turns out to be a nice thing you can get people into in about 2 weeks of instruction. It turns out not to be a lot of code, and it's the first time for many people they've actually dealt with Boolean equations and Boolean artifacts as data structures, right, manipulated by procedures. I mean, everybody who comes to this more or less thinks that Carnot maps somehow magically scale up to 180 variables, but we just don't know how. Right? And this, the first thing we disabuse people of is that Boolean things are data structures you manipulated by algorithms. Let's go do it. Then the next thing we do is we actually get them seriously into the real data structures that people use, and we do a very sophisticated logic repair problem. We give them a net list and we say, we think something's wrong with this. Here's a Boolean equation for what this thing is supposed to be doing. Tell us what's wrong. And that turns into some interesting scripting, and in this case, the BDD universe. And then we have them build a placer. And we have them build, in this case, a quadratic placer. The reasons for this are that the quadratic placer is something you can teach people how to do in about a week. Right? It sort of smells like an analytical placer because you're writing a large equation and optimizing it. Right? The problem with trying to teach a real analytical placer is you need to know a lot about optimization to actually even frame the problem. And if I had 2 more weeks, I could teach people how to do a real analytical placer. I've done that in the longer versions of the course. But if you got about a week to teach placement, you can teach classical iterative improvement methods, and then you can teach QP, and you can actually have people do big quadratic placements because all they really need to know is linear algebra. And then we have them build a router, a real router, an ASIC kind of a router where we actually route things that they placed in the quadratic placer. And the logistics for actually making these things work is that these projects are all specified as ASCII text describes the problem to be solved. So in the case of the layout problems, there's an ASCII text netlist. It's human readable. It's on the website. There's lectures about what the problem is. There's documents about what the particular software artifact that we want them to design is. There's a very significant tight specification for what we want it to do, right? And we give them a bunch of netlists as text files. And we say, your job is to write a placer. You place it, and the output is a text file, right, which you can read. So it's the world's least efficient, most portable, right, kind of a form factor. However, you still, and this sounds stupid, you still have to pay attention to things like Windows text file, Mac text file, Linux text file, non-United States ASCII character set text file. I mean, all this nonsense that you actually have to get serious about if you want to build a regression suite that has people who on the forum would prefer to talk to each other with a Cyrillic alphabet. And it's architected just like an industrial regression suite. There's little benchmarks, medium benchmarks, big benchmarks with lots of pieces, each of which has pass, fail, or qualitative sorts of things. So to the extent that that's the thing that's visible on the right, that's a piece of the router project. And one of the early sets of benchmarks for the router project says, can you route a net in one layer with 2 points that's just a straight line? Can you route it if it's a vertical wire? Can you route it if it's a horizontal wire? Can you route a net if it's got a bend in it? Okay? Can you route a net if it's got to go around an obstacle and thus have a bend in it? Okay? What if you have to go south and then east? What if you have to go south and then west? What if you have to go north and then east? Because anybody who's ever written any code that does geometry stuff knows there's gigantic sets of case statements that all look exactly the same except for the north, south, east, west, kinds of stuff. And those are the sorts of errors. Many, many, many little benchmarks, lots and lots and lots of partial feedback gives people a sense of whether their code is working or not. And then the programs, the net lists, they get large. They get interesting. They have 10,000 gates. They have 15,000 gates. And suddenly, you are building tools that place things that feel realistic to a student who has never done this before, that seem tiny to people like us who do 10 million gate things over lunch. Right? But for for folks for whom this is their very first engagement with the discipline, building a placer for 15,000 gates is really cool. These are just some pictures. This is what one of the outputs at the 8x8 recursive partition level looks for, for a placement, for a quadratic point placement. The thing on the right, to the extent that it's visible, is kind of an ASIC style 2-layer preferred direction, bend minimizing, fairly realistic ASIC router. For 2 layers. For people who are old enough to remember this, these are the MCNC benchmarks. Right, from the dawn of time, right, in the late 1980s and late 1990s, but they're all open, they're easy, and they are, and they're actually industrial and realistic, and for people on first engagement, pretty cool. Now you have some new problems. Again, I'm delivering this at a planetary scale. These people don't live in the University of Illinois or my previous gig at Carnegie Mellon. How do you have people do a layout tool if they can't see the layout? Right? It's not like I can offer them Virtuoso. Right, on the MOOC platform, and it's not like I can just say, go find a good a good implementation of a graphical layout editor, or go find an implementation of OpenGL, or whatever. You have to be respectful of the fact that people have the platforms that they have. So what we ultimately did was we built a set of fairly highly functional layout viewing and layout editing environments completely in HTML5. Right, and so what that means is that if you can get a modern browser running on your machine, even if it's on the slow side, you have a fairly functional graphical editor and you can actually do this stuff. Right? And in HTML5, you have some really cool kinds of capabilities. One of the reasons we did this as a text file is that it's just very easy to parse that thing and it's easy to do things. And so you would go to the website and you would open up a portal, and the portal would then download, in this case, JavaScript that implements the HTML5 graphics primitives, and you literally, you just take the text file sitting on your computer desktop and you drop it on the screen, and whoosh, you're in the editor and off you go. Right? And so this made it possible for people all over the planet with some incredibly lousy platforms to engage with the course in a serious first-class kind of a way. So that's the kind of the technology side of what we did and how we did it and how we deployed it. Let's talk about the thing that always makes people uncomfortable. Right? So this is the elephant in the room. I'm showing you a picture of a funnel. Why am I showing you a picture of a funnel? MOOCs have this interesting property. Many people start. Few people finish. Right? These things are actually called funnels. The people who do this stuff on the platform, it's called the funnel. How's your funnel looking? I mean, it's actually the way we talk about these things. So let me talk about my funnel. Let me just give you real, nitty-gritty data from the first time I ran this MOOC. About 17,500 people registered for the course. And the course was was advertised on the MOOC website, but it took me over a year to actually get it together and develop it to the point that I could actually deliver it. About 7,000 people watched a video. About 1,300 people did a homework assignment. About 400 people did a software assignment. Slightly less than 400 people 500 people took the final exam. About 400 people passed, right, and got, about 70% of the material. So a pretty severe funnel. It is what it is. Let's take a little, closer look. So first, let me just offer you some demographics. What did they look like? Average age 30, right? These are mostly adult professionals seeking skills. Minimum age 15, right? Maximum age 75. Have a bachelor's degree, 30%. Have a master's or a PhD, about 30%. I got some really interesting email from distinguished engineers at Synopsys who took this course, right? I got the most amazing sort of universe of input. I mean, there are people who knew nothing about this stuff, and their passion was quantum physics, but they said, oh, looks really cool. And they took the course and they said, wow, that was really cool. Thank you. That was fun. I had people completely outside the business who took the course. I had people completely inside the business. You don't have to make eye contact with me if it makes you uncomfortable. But, there are there are people in this room who took the MOOC. I mean, I'm in the interesting universe of having done this MOOC. I'm going around giving these lovely keynotes. Thank you for the invitation. People did not come up to me after MOOCs and want to shake my hand and take a selfie with me, right, until I did this, right? It's a very interesting universe to have this sort of experience. The one thing that I'm unhappy about, it's kind of consistent with the sort of trends, male 88%, female 12%. That's unfortunately just about dead on what a computer science department's undergraduate population looks like right now. Things are getting better. University of Illinois this year, 25% of the freshman class is female. We had to work very hard to make that happen. We're proud of that. But the demographics are certainly challenging. We'd certainly like to do better. Where were they? Everywhere. So this is a heat map. The more brown something is, there are more people there. The more yellow something is, the fewer people there. If it comes out grayish, then there was no one there. And this is by country. So not a lot of surprise. The United States of America and India as the kind of great hotspots. But every continent except Greenland and Antarctica, right? Had people in it. Some of these things make sense. So, for example, Brazil is the place that had the most, participants in South America. I was surprised. In Africa, I would have guessed it would have been Nigeria, that has a fairly vibrant sort of economic, kind of culture. But it was Egypt that actually had the most participants. It's a little difficult to read China on this one. This is the map from the very first offering of the MOOC, and at that time, China was blocking all of this stuff. That has subsequently changed, and I have to go back and make the map again. I haven't made the map for the most recent edition of the MOOC. So here's a kind of an up-close version. One of the things that's fun about MOOCs is they are gigantic sources of data. The platform folks are collecting every click, every view, every homework assignment, every forum post, and archiving them. So you can do interesting data dive. The horizontal axis here is every one of my 69 lecture videos. Okay? The vertical axis is how many people watched it. Okay? And so it starts as a sort of a big number, and it goes to a sort of a smaller number, right? So the first thing that does actually happen is, in this case, about 17,000 people signed up for the class. The first thing that happens to everybody in the MOOC universe is half of the people who sign up never come, right? Let's just acknowledge that unlike an in-person class where you're writing a check and you're registering and you're sending in a deposit and all this other stuff, this is the most frictionless sign-up imaginable. I mean, it's harder to get a table at a good restaurant than it is to sign up for this class, right? You just go in and you go, click. So, oh, Rob looks like a charming guy. Oh, hey, VLSI CAD, Right? And then 3 months later when the course is offered and they get an email, they go, nah. Right? So about half of the people never show up. And then there is a fall off. Right? And so in this case, the fall off goes from about 7,000 people watching to about 2,000 people watching a pretty geeky topic, you know, kind of EDA at a pretty serious level. So the interesting question about this is, should I be happy, right, that the curve looks like this, or should I be sad, right, that the curve looks like this? So let me offer you some normative numbers, because we're all quantitative kind of people. How many is 7,000 that wanted to come watch my first video? That is bigger than Cadence, okay, which has about 6,000 employees, which has just about 9,000 people today. Okay? I feel good about that. All right? About a month into the course, I had 5,000 people, which is roughly the size of DAC on the 50th anniversary in 2013. Right? I feel pretty good about that. The course ended up sort of converging to about a little less than 2,000 people actively watching the video. That's the equivalent of my face-to-face class taught by me for 40 years. Right? So, yes, I would be happier if it started at 7,000 and dropped to 6,000, right? We are all working in the MOOC universe at figuring out the length and figuring out the distribution of materials and sort of modalities of instruction to sort of make that stuff happen. But even with this, I feel pretty good about this. So the takeaway from this particular slide is there's lots of ways to deliver educational value in a MOOC. Right? So the fact that 500 people made it to the final exam, that's a really big number. That's a number slightly bigger than the number of people registered at ICCAD this year. Okay? Think about that. Right? Taking my final exam, right? And, you know, which had a really cool problem on rinse rule on it. Right? That I'm very personally proud of. Right? That's as geeky as you can get in the EDA space. And something like 4 times that many people were watching the videos because they found them valuable, because, you know, I mean, these things are pretty intense. Right? There must have been some value delivered. So the fact that not everybody made it to the final exam, interesting thing to ponder. You learn interesting things in the MOOC business. All right, so what do you learn? You learn that my handwriting is unreadable at planetary scale. Now, my friends and my mom, they've been telling me this forever. Right? Challenging. But the data from, you know, when people were sitting, you know, like where my friends at the registered table here are sitting, was that if you sort of stuck with me for like 15 weeks, you could sort of work through that. The folks in the MOOC land are not so patient, right? And so the first time you get, you know, hundreds of sort of pokes on the forum saying, Professor, was that a D? It's like, no, it was a G. I go, really? I actually had to, about a third of the way through the MOOC, I actually had to go back and I had to stop doing, I mean, this is like a big page of Boolean algebra. I had to stop doing the very detailed manual derivations that I was writing. I had to start going back and I had to start animating them in, one character, one symbol at a time, like I was writing them. And I had to use the pen for more sort of emotional, you know, like this one is the really interesting equation, or, you know, derivation, derivation, derivation. Okay, here it is. I'm going to write it. I'm going to write it really slow. Right? D1. You know, da da da. Again, it proved to be a lot more work for me, but it proved to improved the ability of students to actually follow along without being, you know, this being problematic. You have to exhibit a lot of creativity in how you build homework problems. You spend a lot of time because you have to not only have them divided up into pieces that are sort of multiple choice worthy, but you also have to oversupply them so that everybody gets a slightly different version of the problem so you don't have rampant cheating. MOOC folks, MOOC learners crave interaction, and so you actually have to have a team of people who are available at least the first couple of times you run the MOOC to answer questions. As much as you think you're clear, you're probably not. And one of the things that's interesting, it's the most interesting, is that when you have 17,000 eyeballs looking at your material, all bugs are shallow, right? And so I had lecture slides that I had been teaching rigorously for 15 years that were wrong, right? And I went in, you know, people would, and they were so sweet. They said, Professor Rutenbar, that slide about tech mapping, really? That doesn't seem to make sense. And I was like, no, really, I'm the expert. And then they would say, we respectfully request you consider that maybe it's not. Then I said, no, really, right? And then when enough people say, really, we're trying to do the homework and it really doesn't work, I had to go back to primary source materials in this, in this space, and I had to go read algorithms, and son of a gun, they caught me. I was wrong. I was dead wrong. I was like, wow, I don't know how that one went through 15 years, because that couldn't possibly work, right? And I had to go back and I had to edit videos again, and I had to make material. So it's an amazing, having a population this large. And the other thing that happens is that there are, and all people who do MOOCs see this, there naturally arise leaders who want to help other people. And they post things on the forums. And you can actually, the people who are in the forums can vote on the quality of their answers, and they rise to the top of the forums. And they get personal reward by being the leaders who other people seek for guidance. And similarly, the jerks and the trolls fall to the bottom. And there are a few. And the other thing that happens is the second time you run the MOOC, you can send them an email and say, would you like to be a community TA? Right? And 15 or 20 people will come back and say, I would love to be a community TA. And you have people built in all geographies, in all time zones, following you along and helping you out. It's an amazing sort of community building thing. And I already talked about this one. You have to be very careful about the platform. If you want people to do layouts and you want people to see layouts, you have to build a layout editor that you can give to them. So let me come to the sort of the shortest part of the talk and the very end of the talk. Why did I do this? This was a spectacular amount of work, right, on a non-monetized platform, right? So, I did this basically for free. Why? So, a decade ago, a couple of decades ago, there were a lot of EDA classes and there were lots of students, right? So there were lots and lots of checkboxes, and I totally apologize for the fact that this is a picture of North America. I couldn't get one of those Mercator projection things that has all. I will go find that. This is true. I believe this is true in Asia. I believe this is true in Europe, right? A decade ago there were lots of students. Today there are not so many classes and not so many students. It's even true for me, right? I used to have a very large number of students who were all in EDA kinds of places, either in big verticals or in EDA companies. Now I have a whole lot of students who are at Google, right? It's just the nature of the game right now. So why did I do this? I think that every intellectually vibrant discipline needs an on-ramp. It needs a way that people who don't do this for a living get in the game and learn that this is cool, that this is neat, that this is beautiful, that this is valuable. And if your university in your geography, in your continent, in your time zone is not offering you a world-class course, then somebody else needs to. So if we want to energize a new generation of EDA, if you want to move EDA into other areas or other kinds of systems, if we want to move it into new technology platforms, carbon nanotubes or plastic electronics or whatever, if we want to translate EDA sideways into the Internet of Things and automobile platforms and other kinds of things, I believe that somebody has to teach the foundations, because there's a way of thinking, a way of decomposing big problems, a way of looking across very different domains, logical domains, electrical domains, geometric domains, and sort of abstracting, verifying, synthesizing, integrating. There's a mindset and a particular facility. Somebody's got to teach that, and and an ASIC flow is a good place to start teaching that. Somebody's got to teach that, and maybe the planet only supports a handful of global EDA courses like that. And the analogy I use, I think this works at planetary scale, it works very well at least in North America, is bookstores. There used to be a bookstore, a mom and pop bookstore on every corner in every block, okay? And consolidation of big chain bookstores in the United States, those were Barnes and Nobles and Borders, in other places, I'm assuming they are other vendors, made most of the mom and pop places go away because the value of scale, right, made it possible to be much more effective, and the fact that you could go get a Starbucks, right, at the bookstore was also a value add. And then suddenly the internet happened, okay? And suddenly there's only 2 places that you can get books, and they are Amazon and Apple. Right? So maybe EDA is like that, and somebody needs to be Jeff Bezos here. And if that has to be me, okay, somebody had to be the first, to do this. Hopefully I'm not the only guy doing this, and I would really hope that I'm not the last guy doing this, but somebody had to just try this and see if this was going to work. And so, okay, this is how you do it. So what's the demand for doing this? Because mostly I've shown you data from the very first one of these MOOCs. Right? So the answer to this, I ran it again. I ran it again last year in 2014, in the spring of 2014. And what I'm going to show you is a graph of registrations for the MOOC. And the yellow is the 10 weeks of the MOOC, right, that I was doing it. And the answer was that by the end of the MOOC, I had over 10,000 people registered. Right? So 17,000 people the first time, 10,000 people. And the thing that astonished me was that the course kept running and people kept signing up. Right? And the most common sort of interaction on that was people saying, whoa, this is cool. I'm sorry I didn't know about this. I'm going to follow along. Can I submit homework 1 late? When are you going to offer this again? Let me give you some concrete numbers. From the second offering of this MOOC, 166,000 video views, 17,000 homework problems submitted, about 1,500 forum posts. I had over 10,000 people registered for the second MOOC. I think the planetary demand is big enough. I think this is good. And I'm very grateful to Patrick Grunewald, who's letting me use this slide. I think he showed it at ISPD. The first time, and then he showed it most recently at Ralph Otten's valedictory sort of retirement sort of thing. So this is a slide. The blue bars are the size of the population of people employed in either this industry segment, and the red bar is the sort of total, basically, market volume. Now, why Patrick knows the numbers for the left-hand side of that, right, of a certain interesting segment of the entertainment industry, I don't know, right? But the numbers for the bar, the kind of the bar sort of in the middle are EDA, is that it's roughly a $6 billion industry, and there's roughly 26,000 people. Or said differently, there are slightly fewer professionals in EDA on planet Earth than registered for my MOOCs. Right? I think the planetary demand for this is robust. Right? I think people find this stuff cool. I think people find this stuff interesting and worthwhile. And maybe a few of them will become professionals. Maybe more of them will just go away and have some respect for what it is we do when they go design, their Internet of Things kinds of stuff. So to finally wrap up all of this, I did the first MOOCs, the first one and the second one. I will do the third one shortly in a couple of months. Why did I do it? Because somebody has to teach the planet that this stuff is important. Right? Because these ideas are beautiful and important, and somebody has to teach that. Right? And because I think the discipline needs the excitement of things like MOOCs at planetary scale, bringing new populations of persons into the discipline who've never been there before. Depending on your metric, do you want to count the video views? Do you want to count how many people did the homework assignments? Do you want to count that they made it, they took the final, right? I think I have personally added between 5,000 and 2,500 seriously EDA-trained human beings to planet Earth over the last 18 months. I'm feeling pretty good about that. Thank you.